Steube right now. He's joining us live with more on his perspective on what unfolded in D.C. today. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us, and we're glad to hear that you're safe right now.
Thank you. Yeah, we're still sheltering in place. My staff has been here the entire day after we just, right before we came on the air a couple of minutes ago, got another shelter in place order. So we're all here in our offices sheltering in place until the Capitol Police is going to release us.
Now, you all were there in the chamber voting on those election results. I know that you were voting against those results today. What was that like for you when you were there in the chamber? All of this is coming in. What were they telling you there?
I actually was on the House chamber for a little while and then stepped off to go have a conversation with another member. And so when things started to happen, I actually was not in the chamber when they locked down the chamber. So I got caught in between where the protesters were coming in the main Capitol complex and where the House chamber was, amongst a number of different Capitol police officers who weren't able to get me onto the House floor because they had shut and locked everything down. So we were shepherded with two other officers into a side room. There's a conference room off the House floor called the Ways and Means Conference Room. When I entered there was three other members that got caught outside of the House chamber when everything got locked down. So we were actually surrounded on all sides by people on the windows trying to break in, and then people from the front after they had gained access to the hallway in between the Capitol area and the House chamber.
Wow, very interesting. I'm sure your staff, your family members, your loved ones were quite concerned about what was happening there for you. What were they saying to you? Were you getting a bunch of text messages, emails, or were you not even able to take a look at that because of all the chaos that was happening?
So they shut down, I think, partly because the vice president is here. Anytime you have the president or the vice president, they shut down cell phone connectivity. I was connected to Wi-Fi, so I was able to communicate with my wife and staff and other family members through text messages. We weren't able to use the phone because of that. So there was an ability to communicate. We had three officers with us in the room who had their radios, so they could radio, but they had no control of the area directly outside of the door. And they had to, after they got all the other members that were on the House floor through the basement and sheltered in place, they had to then methodically come back through the hallways with tear gas to move the protesters out of the areas that we were in. Once they did that, they were able to open the door that we were in and get us down into the basement.
Wow, so you were barricaded there in that room, witnessing law enforcement being injured, gassed with their own tear gas. Did any of that affect you at all?
Well, I want to commend the courageous acts of our law enforcement. My family has a law enforcement background. My father's a former sheriff. My brother's a deputy who still serves. And anybody who puts on the uniform and is willing to stand between chaos and protecting lives of the innocent, I always want to commend them. Part of my statement was commending the officers that were in the room with us for their professionalism and the way they handled the situation. There were a number of officers that I saw injured. There were a number of officers who then were using the tear gas, who obviously didn't have gas masks on themselves, who were feeling the effects of the tear gas. So anytime we have law enforcement officers, I always want to commend them for what they do for our nation. And anytime you hear things like defund the police, that's the last thing that we want to see in our country.
Well, Congressman Steube, we knew these peaceful protests for the most part were going to be taking place there. A lot of people here from Sarasota and Manatee counties going up there to take place in some of these protests in D.C. But we were not ready for this to escalate to the level that it did. And these groups of protesters, they have not declared a specific organization. There have been some people on social media who have said there are, Tea Party flags flying. There's pro-Trump flags flying, Antifa flags, things of that nature. But what do you think that this level of rioting, in a sense, kind of took for the Republican Party? Does it give a bad image for those that are Trump supporters, an overall image?
Well, and there's actually reports early on that they were saying that Antifa and Black Lives Matter individuals actually put on Trump paraphernalia and kind of cascaded themselves as Trump supporters and were part of these people. We're not going to know the answers to who these individuals were that were actually involved in the violence until after an investigation is done. Just as my statement says, just like I condemn the violence we saw in D.C., regardless of the organization, regardless of the group, I don't condone any type of violence, and I condemn the violence that we saw here today and the injuries that we saw sustained on our officers. officers. There's absolutely no excuse for that. We have an avenue for that in America. It's called the First Amendment. We have elected officials like myself who have come up here on behalf of the American people to do the will of the American people. I intend to continue to do that. We can do that in a peaceful manner. We don't need the type of things that we saw in the U.S. Capitol today.
Congressman, you are a military veteran yourself, correct?
Yes.
And you have probably served overseas. And is something that we saw today relevant to what you've seen in other parts of the world? And what message do you think that this is sending that protesters can overtake our Capitol building?
Well, I certainly think after this, Capitol Police are certainly going to look at their security plan. One of the things that I was talking about with the sergeant of arms officer, I won't name who it was, that was barricaded in the room with me, was why in the world don't you allow officers like me, members like me who have valid concealed carry permits, who are former military veterans, former infantry officer like myself who served in action in Iraq, why are you telling us we can't carry our firearm in defense of ourselves or others? Because clearly you guys can't hold the line. They're great at what they do, but you can't carry a police officer around everywhere you go. Those that are trained and properly trained should have the ability to defend themselves. So hopefully that they will relook at some of those rules and allow members like myself who go through a specific training course, I don't care what you want to go through as far as training, allow us to defend ourselves. Because the challenge that I had, having the training that I had, is we are permitted to carry our firearms only in our offices. So I'm now barricaded in a place in the Capitol structure, luckily with officers that ended up getting stuck in the same room that I was stuck in without an ability to defend myself had I been stuck there without officers to defend myself. And that's not the American way. I fully support the Second Amendment. And I think when we have circumstances like that, we shouldn't deprive members of Congress the ability to defend themselves and others.
Well, Congressman, I do believe that you all are still taking part in the election vote counting. Are you all planning to reconvene at any point tonight, or is this going to be pushed off to a later date?
So the rumor is, and again, there's nothing official that has gone out, this is the clearly rumor that we've been hearing from different news reports, is they intend on reconvening at 8 o'clock. Like I said minutes before coming on this broadcast, we still had shelter-in-place orders. I still have my staff here. I tried to get them out before things started to get chaotic, and they had shut down the buildings before that. So my staff has been sheltered in place. I don't see how that they can start a joint session of Congress while the members are still sheltered in place. There are abilities to get through the tunnels as long as those are secure. They had been breached early on. Cannon was breached, one of the House office buildings. So we have been told that the Capitol complex is clear, but if that's the case, then why in the world haven't you allowed us and staff to be able to exit the building safely? There's now a curfew in D.C. at 6 p.m. So I have staff members that are concerned that if they leave the Capitol building, now that it's past the curfew time, that they're going to be stopped by law enforcement officers and maybe arrested. So we have a scenario here where you have members sheltered in their office. I don't see how you're going to start a proceeding on the floor of the House where a woman was shot. That's a crime scene now, and everything that's occurred, you have broken glass. I don't know if the tear gas has dissipated, but the hallway outside of the chamber where I was when we left was completely doused in tear gas as we were leaving. So I don't know how you could continue a joint session of Congress tonight. The vice president would have to come back and preside over that. You would have a number of vote series depending on the objections that are made to the different states. So I don't see how we can continue that tonight. But the rumor has been, and Pelosi has put out guidance that she intends on coming back sometime this evening.
All right, Congressman Steube, broken glass there, a woman shot, and a lot of craziness happening there in the Capitol building. But we are glad to hear you are safe and continue to do so throughout the evening. Have a good night.
Thank you. You too.